So is this it? Is this series 3? Is that?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, this is definitely planned. We planned to start series 3 around.
Yeah, we took a
now,
break
yeah.
that was planned and not due to any kind of breakdown or other thing.
Oh.
And we're coming back now, unrelated to the book coming out in a few weeks.
In no way is this a cynical attempt. Yeah, no way. It's not a cynical attempt for us to market the book. This is definitely the exact time that we want to start season 3.
Yeah. We haven't waited for Sam, though, have we? Should we crack on?
Hi there, and welcome to episode 179 and series 3, possibly, of the ADHD Adults podcast. I'm James Brown, the man who once read a history book, but on reflection, it was so heavily focused on a very hungry caterpillar. It might not have been written from an academic historian's perspective. And as always, I'm joined by Dr. Alex Connor, who lives a life that means I am very much going to have to explain his story to a series of detectives, and then later on, probably a Netflix documentary team, and to the disappointment of several people, probably, we're still without Mrs AuDHD as she recovers from being tired. Alex, hi.
Hail be thou.
I'm sorry, what? Is that, I mean, is that historical? Yeah. Is the well running dry?
Yeah. His high story.
That's double bubble. We got 2 hellos there.
Yeah.
Nice. Made a rod for your own back. Anyway, how are you, Alex? He asks, knowing what will be cheerfully hurled back at him.
I'm excellent, thanks, James. Yeah, I have. I've had to add some boundaries in my life over the planned break, because I was crumbling slightly, despite appearing to be fine on the outside, because people forget that we can't do the normal things of life, or the things that appear to be correct rather than typical things, and that's because of neuronormative behavior, right? Which is definitely something I've talked about before, despite you texting me, James, to say, have you heard of this? And I said it literally on the podcast we recorded the day before you.
I would like to dispute that, but I can't be asked to listen to any of our podcast episodes.
One of whom sent us a letter. They've got worse.
Yeah, that's brilliant non sequitur. Have they really?
They have, yeah. It's we're grateful for any letter. This one was sent in by. Oh, what was it? It's a Robert from Kidderminster, James.
Oh,
and it says, I listened to your episode on cognitive flexibility, possibly, we don't know. And James might not be cognitively flexible, but from the sound of his bedroom growing up, he did a lot of yoga and must have been physically flexible. Not yoga, sorry, wanking. Bloody hell, Robert, that's extreme. Is it? He's doing a rude thing now.
Yeah, he's not wrong.
No, he's not. We've had a real letter. Am I allowed to?
Nope.
All right then. It says, series 3. Can't we just stop now? It was from me. It wasn't. I've got nothing else. Don't make me stop. It's a lie. It's a bluff. The real letter. It's from James, not you, James, that says, hi guys, I've just watched your first podcast. I've been left a little gobsmacked, in a good way. I'm 48, serial failed entrepreneur, 2 failed marriages, 100k in debt. I was very depressed and have been treated for depression. I gave up alcohol as we didn't have a healthy relationship either, and planned taking my own life twice in the last year. Trigger warning, soz. Now I'm back to teaching golf full time, which I love, but I'm absolutely useless at doing the things I should be doing rather than want to be doing. Not sure why else I've reached out, really. I think out of relief that it's not just me, and perhaps I can't help being a useless twat. Winky face. Thank you, James. We are also those useless twats.
We are, and it's lovely when you manage to catch somebody who's watched the first episode. When I was chatting to you over the break, I told you that we lose, and it's 66% of our listeners by episode 8. So other James, other James, I'm hoping that you do get past episode 8 because it does get worse after them.
Yeah. Or maintains the level of crapocracy.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Anyway, as usual, this Christmas Day that was so boring that playing How Many Pigs in Blankets going to put in my bum of a podcast is a tragedy in 3 parts. We choose a theme. Last time around, at the planned end of series 2, we talked about ADHD and cogflex, as Alex calls it, or cognitive flexibility. And this week, whenever this week is, probably in February, I guess, isn't
Definitely
it? At some point. Yeah. We're going to be discussing the history of ADHD, but not like history at school, which was obviously just anything like my school, Archduke Ferdinand, and why the royal family is so bloody good. The 3 parts include the David Starkey of evidence, Alex the psycho education monkey.
Hello.
Talking about the in this case, some really interesting evidence around the history of ADHD. And in part 2, we'll give our personal reflections and tips on dealing with the history of ADHD. I think you can just about squeeze a tip in. Doing first ding of the series.
Well
first ding of the series. Thank you. And then we'll answer some questions which you've sent in the final section, because
how many pigs in blankets
did this person who wasn't me put in their bum?
Yeah.
It's about 6.
It's about how many I would have thought.
Exactly. It's not surprising, is it?
No.
Yeah, and we can't be asked to write 3 parts anymore, so we'll answer some questions in the last part. So, Alex, obviously I've lived through most of this being a Dracula, but if you could give us, your silly little take on the history of ADHD, that'd be great.
Okay, the Merriam-Webster dictionary defines history, James, as
no. Please. I know you love this. I know you love how much it frustrates me, but just no in capital letters.
Not really. I haven't looked up what it's. I mean, it presumably just says past and that. Right? No, not really. Also, we're not starting in the 18th century, as most people do when they talk about ADHD. We're going to go further back for a second. And not ancient Rome. No, we're going back about 350 years before Christ roamed the earth, James, like a dinosaur.
Isn't I do like that image, but isn't that the same? Ancient Rome was about then.
Don't be an obtuse man, James. That's the thing I'm doing, calling you an obtuse man, because there was a man called Theophrastus who lived not in ancient Rome, but in ancient Greece, and he wrote a thing called An Obtuse Man, who, according to a few people and one quite cool paper from some Brazilian researchers, compared quite favorably to a DSM-5 ADHD description, and it is pushing it a bit, but beggars can't be choosers. And
done me. There's a joke in there somewhere, being married to Sam, but I can't think of it, so I'll come back to you later on with that one.
A beggars can't be choosers joke. Yeah, the reason I'm telling you this about the obtuse man 350 years before Christ stalked the earth was that ADHD is caused by mobile phones. It's a modern condition. It isn't. It's been around for ages, as long as there have been humans. Anywho, as with all things like cars and football and murder forests, we look to Germany to lead the way in ADHD history. And what's generally considered the first proper reference to ADHD in medical texts, or ADHS as they call it. Back in 1775, there's a controversial, James, book called Der philosophische Arzt, which means the philosophical art doctor, was published by a German doctor, obviously called Melchior Adam Weikart. And the reason it was controversial, brilliantly, is it broke from the prevailing opinion that disorders of emotion and behavior are not from astrological charts and witchcraft. They're because of medical and physiological causes. And in it, he described a condition that he called Mangel der Aufmerksamkeit, which means a shortage of attention, or attentio volubilis, which is Latin for a similar thing, where Weikart described adults and children who have a Mangel der Aufmerksamkeit as being easily distractible by anything, even their own imagination, lacking perseverance and persistence, and overactive and generally impulsive, and characterized as unwary, careless, flighty, and bacchanalian.
Title of your sex tape?
I quite like it. I'm not very bacchanalian at all anymore. I wish I was. Even this is alcohol-free beer. How pathetic's that?
I don't know. I'll say very just because it's mean, but I support you fully in drinking it because it's fucking awful.
That's true, yeah. It's actual disease. Right. Then, followed years later in the 19th century by another German book written by Dr. Heinrich Hoffmann for his son, and which contained a series of short stories, fun ones about a boy called Zappel Philip, and what that is fidgety Philip, kind of translates as. And according to the Secretary General of the World Federation, or the first one anyway, of ADHD, Professor Johannes Tomei, hi Johannes, who said because yeah, we're friends. It is astonishing how clearly the typical.
Sorry, no. That was a ridiculous name drop because one of the biggest names in the field of ADHD. You used to work with him in Swansea, and he knows you, and you can speak to him, etc., etc.
Yeah, no, yeah, we are. I would say we're actually friends, which is nice. I hope he would too. We used to sit in a bar in Swansea and chat about the world of ADHD. Right. So Johannes said, it is astonishing how clearly the typical symptoms of ADHD are depicted in Hoffmann's book. And I think that's really interesting because it was a long bloody time ago.
Did he say it in the pub when you were chatting? Anyway, enough about Germany, Alex. For God's sake, spin on.
Right. There were also publications on ADHD in 1812, 1848, 59, 1885, and 1892, but we haven't read them. So I'm going to rewind 250 years. Before he wrote Jurassic Park, and I'm certain it was him, Alexander Crichton, in 1798, it wasn't him, spotted ADHD himself and wrote about it. And he didn't call it that, but he was pretty active about the inattention bits. And he described the distraction when, and I'm quoting now, rabbit ears for you, James, any object of external sense or of thought occupies the mind in these people in such a degree that a person doesn't receive a clear perception from any other sense. And at the time, remember, no one was talking about mental illness or like 3 people. And unlike people from Britain now, Crichton seemed to have been able to move freely across Europe, working in Holland, France, Germany, and Austria. Thanks, Brexit. That was the way of things, mostly lobotomized things for hundreds of years until right at the start of the last century, 1902, when James was around 100, whippersnapper, the real pioneer of pediatric medicine, because I'm doing the Dracula thing, even though he's tired, James still. And Sir George Still called his observations of frankly blatant ADHD in young boys, obviously for annoying reasons. He called this an abnormal defect of moral control in children. We get told off, James, don't we, for liking that a lot.
We do. I mean, I love that, and I wear that as a kind of badge of honor. Exactly. Yeah. But people have, publicly said you shouldn't use that because it's obviously not a nice phrase. But we're claiming it. We're reclaiming it now, taking it back.
Yeah, I adore it. Another story you won't know, James, and I say that because you literally talk about history to people, and we wrote this together, is that Ritalin, which was invented just as World War II was ending, was named after the guy that invented its wife. Ritalin derives from Marguerite or Rita Panizon, the wife of Leandro Panizon, who's in this. I can see you. Why are you giggling?
Because you said it was invented by the guy that invented its wife.
Oh no! Did I get the words wrong? It was named after the guy that invented. Yeah, it wasn't invented by the guy that invented its wife. I don't think women were really allowed to be scientists back then either. So she might have done. They just ignored her.
Anyway, carry on. I still don't get it, but carry on.
He called it Rita after his wife because he seemed to have tested it on her, and she was more concentrating in tennis rather than having a change in blood pressure. Rita was the first person to take methylphenidate and described its effects to her husband. So Ritalin.
I would just like to clarify Alex's earlier comments that I did indeed fucking know this, but I often got it mixed up. But yeah, I was kind of aware.
I think what's really important is to remember that the proper description of ADHD and ADD back then, they had both. The actual, what we consider ADHD now, the beginnings of it, was in the late 1970s and not fully published till 1980. And at no point did anyone think at that point that it might be worth looking at, and just check my notes, whether it occurred in half of the world's fucking population. It was just really, as you all know.
Yeah. Like dogs and cats.
Yeah, they did look in dogs. I mean, you don't need to really.
Well, no, didn't I send you that paper where they've looked at ADHD in dogs and ADHD characteristics, and they've identified ADHD? Sam and I have chatted a lot about our cats having neurodivergent characteristics, and there's a paper where people have looked at the ADHD characteristics in some dogs.
I can absolutely believe it, but they haven't got a very developed prefrontal cortex, have they? So it wouldn't be shocking. But in 1979 was the first time that someone decided that maybe ADHD research should include girls. I think that was in the DSM-3 or the 2. The DSM-2, which was like in the 60s, refers to children with brain damage having hyperactivity, mild brain damage with hyperactivity and a short attention span, distractibility, impulsiveness. But lists under that, and we think this should be a t-shirt as well, non-psychotic organic brain syndromes, which is quite cool, isn't it? I've got a non-psychotic organic brain syndrome. They also have hyperkinetic reaction in childhood or adolescence. Pretty cool.
It's a good band in that. I can't believe it's mad. The DSM-2 was in the 60s. Anyway, what about the children that have grown up into adults?
Yeah, the adult children.
A bit like the adult children. Yeah, the big children.
So DSM-2 does have a thing which is brilliantly called inadequate personality, James. Definitely what you are. And but when you read the behavior pattern in this old 60s DSM-2, it's ineffectual responses to emotional and social and intellectual and physical demands. Yep. While a patient seems neither physically nor mentally deficient, he does manifest inadaptability and ineptness and poor judgment, etc. It's brutal. Back like in the 90s, DSM-3, they introduced this idea of girls having ADHD, girls as in female children. It's not me suddenly referring to all women as girls, like in the olden days. That would be quite a shift, wouldn't it? A Russell Brand style shift in tone.
It's series 3, mate. It's all up in the air. It's all going to change now.
Read our bookie book. Oh, right. So, adult women still not allowed to have ADHD in the 90s, even in the revised DSM-3, when the H was removed. So people have been using ADD wrongly for nearly 40 years because that was when the H got added and we didn't say ADD anymore. Although ADD, I think, is really useful. It's a really useful description, but it isn't medically used. But I think loads of people use it. And also, people identify as ADD, mainly, I think, because they haven't quite realised that they are the H. They think it's something it isn't.
I think there's quite a lot of people who might be purely inattentive or ADD because they don't hit the threshold for hyperactivity or impulsivity, and particularly in women who might mask those things. But that's just what I think, and that's not when I should be saying this.
And Russell Barkley thinks the hyperactivity can come in differently and later in some people, so it doesn't get spotted as well. Even DSM-4, we're on 5 now, remember, which came out in the year 2000. No mention of grown-ups, James. 2000. That was when ADHD started coming out in 3 flavors, like Tizer and Iron Brew and New Coke.
Tab Cola.
I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, even later, and in popular culture, very late indeed, there was a cover of Time magazine which said, I think this was in the 90s, that said, so you might have attention deficit disorder. It's not just kids that have it. And it wasn't until 2008 that the Who, not the band, and the other major medical decision makers decided that we were allowed to keep our ADHD into adulthood. 2008. That's the same time Adele released Chasing Pavements. It was really relatively recent. This is not ancient history.
Were they related?
Yeah, I think so. I haven't fully looked it up. When you looked in 2008, there were papers like Russell Barkley's papers saying that 50% of adults retain their ADHD. And we now know, of course, fuck all, nothing, very little, because we still don't have any agreement about how many people keep their ADHD. And we, not Science Klaxon, and James, I haven't checked this with you, so I think it's we think that if you took masking and coping out of the picture, we think it would be verging on nobody loses it, really. Right? Where are you on that? That's what I think.
I'm on the fact that a small proportion of people may see neuroplastic changes that might make symptoms more manageable. We know that medication can do that, but I don't think it just goes away.
And it's the implication that it's gone, right? That's the implication of this. It isn't that it gets easier or it's milder in some people.
No, exactly. And I'd also like to say that this is fundamentally important. I am not reading out the next bit in the script because it mentions Coldplay, and it was deliberately and maliciously put in there to annoy me, which is what Alex does, and which is why people think I'm a monster, because he knows how to press my buttons. Anyway, what it said, agreed, and BT Dubs in 2008, Viva La Vida by Coldplay came out, which we both agree is better than anything what Derek Bowie did.
BT Dubs has made me laugh so much.
Do you realize that Coldplay are one of the only artists that Bowie refused to collaborate with, and when they sent him a song, he replied back saying, "It's not very good, is it?"
Really? That's an outrage. And how was he? And how was David Bowie within the confines of the Me Too movement? I've got taken this very dark.
Yeah, I don't know. Let's maybe not not take it any further. Moving on.
But I do agree with you, BT Dubs, about Coldplay being excellent. And I was doing research with Johannes today, first Secretary General of the World Federation of ADHD. That makes me sick. And I was doing this either because I'm a genius of science or because I had a job with people that were, and I just did what I was told. It was one of those two, definitely. And I was working with adults with ADHD before it was allowed for them to have it, to get diagnosed with it. It wasn't really until 2013 that DSM-5 was released and the diagnostic criteria for ADHD adults was fully published. And you want to know one of the exclusion criteria for ADHD and the DSM-5 in 2013?
Go on, Al. Hit us with it.
Autism.
Fucking Jesus Christ.
Christ on a bike. It's unbelievable.
I mean, it is, yeah. It doesn't make any sense when you know what is now known and probably what was known at the time. But
and when you know as many people with both as us.
Exactly.
So instead of DSM-6 3 years ago, I think, they updated DSM-5, but not that much. So they called it DSM-5 TR, which is short for too long, didn't read. TLDR was too long for us. So TR it isn't that. It isn't a massive one, James, ding, but it does allow ADHD to be a thing. Cheers, scientists. And it stops saying Asperger's. I'm not joking. It stops saying mental retardation as well. 2022, they took out the words mental retardation.
Jesus.
I know.
Jesus. Well, out of interest, when's DSM-6 going to drop, Al?
That's a hospital pass. Don't know. Do you know? The APA who make it, the American Psychiatric Association, and you might be interested in this clanging, embarrassing advert, James, that, as we point out in our book, ADHD Unpacked, coming out in March 2025, available for pre-order now. Or it'll sit.
That was shameless, Al. Shameless.
The APA, I know, it was awful. The APA changed their name from the Association of Medical Superintendents of American Institutions for the Insane. Oh, I love that.
Catchy.
It should be on their merch, but it isn't. It's an example of woke history revision, but it was 1892 that they changed that name, probably.
So what do you think the future historians are going to say about what? My brain's not working. We'll start that again. What will future historians say in the future about history, which is a bit into the future from the now, the present, Al?
It's a good question. Almost written to make it impossible to read. That again, better than the Coldplay one. Yeah, and this is the question. This is what we're going to be talking about for the second bit, isn't it? I think that executive functions are part of the diagnostic process. We know that emotional dysregulation and time blindness kind of already are, but make that a lot clearer. And I would say include RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, as well, explicitly. On the other hand, they are very conservative, small c, and they have valid reasons to be conservative. They don't want it being just fashionable every few years. And I think that they might split impulsivity and hyperactivity up to have a three-dimensional model. So the four different flavors, if you like. Or they might just go with combined type for all ADHD, because it possibly is, very loosely, as you say, that's not properly science, because it's quite misunderstood. What we know is that ADHD is not probably a hunter in a farmer's world, and it isn't a newfangled way of saying weak of character. James and I, our laziness and our weak character is unrelated to our neurological condition.
It's entirely coincidental, isn't it?
Absolute coincidence. History has shown us, and it will show us, that ADHD is a lifelong neurological psychiatric disorder. It's influenced massively by genetics. And like all neurodivergent conditions or even personality types, we're all having things in common, but we are also unique. That's, I think, what it will show us. I'm interested in your perspective.
Well, thanks for that. Not the psychoeducation for the finishing. We'll take a break, and we'll be back in part two. For what's part two again? Oh, personal reflections. Apparently, it's the same in series 3. Anyway, see you in a bit.
Bye, no.
Alex, hi.
Aight. What's up? Hello, Governor.
Welcome back to season 3, the very first episode, 179, naturally, of the ADHD Adults podcast without Sam at the moment. We're talking about the history of ADHD, because lots of people asked us to, and we never got round to writing it. Personal reflections on history? Possible? Probably not. But James, what are your thoughts?
Yes.
History of ADHD.
My thoughts. I think, first of all, Al, I think it's important. I think it's a really important topic, which we didn't get around to doing because we couldn't be asked. And the reason I think it's really important is it actually helps us push back against a lot of the bullshit that we hear about it's a new disorder, it's related to screen time, it's invented by the pharmaceutical companies. Because actually, if you look, certainly when Theophrastus had an obese man, an obtuse man, there weren't pharmaceutical companies, and even the first couple of pharmaceutical companies back in, I think, the 17th or 18th century, weren't the big monsters that they are now. And being able to see just the recorded history is important. And the other thing about this that I suppose we didn't cover, because there's so much to cover, and you mentioned it at the end. I know your thoughts on this. You feel that ADHD is almost entirely genetic, don't you?
Yeah, like more than 90%, I think.
Yeah. And if you look at the history of the genetics of ADHD, so if you look at the common genetic mutations, which we know people with ADHD often have, they have been traced back, for tens of thousands of years, at least 50 to 100,000 years. Like the entirety of human history, we know Neanderthals had more ADHD-related mutations than humans, for example. So if you accept a genetic disorder, and then you can see that actually the genetics that drive that disorder have been there throughout the entirety of human history, then obviously it's been around for a long time. And you'll be surprised by this, Al, I suspect. I've always been interested in history, but only the history of health and disease specifically. So, when you go to those little kind of museums of medicine, and you'll see old surgical chairs.
Genuinely thought you said elven disease, like problems in Lord of the Rings.
It is, yeah.
I've got terrible ear rot.
Yeah, I am only in higher elves, though.
Yeah, I don't know what that
so I like, love going to those, kind of medical museums and seeing all the bottles of, tincture of cocaine, which I can't steal because they're glued down, sadly. And I actually, and this is embarrassing, I self-published on Amazon a book on the history of diabetes, because when I passed my PhD, the first chapter mentioned, I went through the history of diabetes, and the Yes, the guy said, "Why is it written in crayon, James? It's shit." The guy that examined the thesis. But what he said, this is really interesting. You should write a book. So I thought I will, and wrote a god awful self-published book on the history of diabetes, which made less money than it cost me to pay for the pictures I put in the book. But I've always been fascinated by it. And
they've kept
if
that
you look
quiet,
at
teasing me the entire time.
I know. But when ADHD Impact, which is available from Bloomsbury Tonic on March the 13th, 2025, when that comes out, if anyone looks at my Amazon profile, they'll see the other piece of shit that I've written, which is really frustrating. Yeah, I'm going to try and make it free because I mean, I've never made any money. I don't think they've even paid me anyway. What I think is probably more important rather than interesting is the recent history, because the way in which society is led and governed and directed to have beliefs around certain issues impacts people that have those issues. And we talked a little bit about this in was it the fatigue or something episode. For me, it's the whole kind of chronic fatigue syndrome / ME thing. Again, ADHD is where people who had chronic fatigue were in the kind of late 80s and 90s when the press were calling it yuppie flu, it's not real, etc. So we know from recent history that we are so far behind the curve on this in terms of even understanding it. I mean, you and I know because we read the papers on these things, and when new papers come out, it's always exciting. Oh, there's a paper until I read it and think, oh, it's not that great. Where are the big papers? Where are the big prospective studies where we're going to actually find out what happens, in the first 5 years after diagnosis? Because obviously, and you know this because when you were sat in the pub having those conversations with Johannes, not knowing you had ADHD, you fucking pillar.
Shut up. I was drinking.
When you were having yeah, exactly. It's just happier times, weren't they? What back then? When was that? I'm trying to about the early 2000s.
07, 08, yeah.
Yeah. So no, very few people would have been looking. So the actual research, the kind of the Russell Barkley vanguard leading the research into adult ADHD, we haven't had long enough to do any of it, really, to properly understand it. And therefore, I think the history is important because it helps us justify the fact that it's a fucking real thing. We've known about it for a long time. It's not trendy. It's not new. It's not driven by our engagement with. I always get electronic and electric mixed up. Electrical devices, not as electronical, is it? Electronical devices, we'll say.
It's not electronical, no, but it should
be.
Yeah,
so it's not from looking at your electronical screens and things like that. It is very much something we've known about for a long time. And as a tip, and this is about as tenuous as you can get as a tip, ding, you use this knowledge, not this knowledge, but, knowledge of the history of ADHD, not what we've said, obviously, read something better. But when people when you hear people say, oh, it's a trendy thing, and as we said, with psychiatrists and GPs, we've heard say this thing, it's trendy, it's new, it's why so many people wanting an assessment. You can use this information. It's not new. We've known about it for years. You can talk about, if you can't remember the names of anything other than Fidgety Phil, talk about Fidgety Phil in the 19th century, children's books, which, pretty much fit the description. So knowledge can be useful. I haven't got much of it and I'm not much use. But when it comes to fighting that narrative, that's my tip, is knowing the fact that there is a history that not many people know about can help you. What about you, Alex? Because Sam's not here. Go.
Go. I really like that. It's true. I find learning about the history of ADHD helps me with my feelings of fraudulence for having it, which I still feel all the time and shouldn't not being helpful. I think the idea that ADHD is a medical diagnosis is not enough. We know that the medical model isn't sufficient, but it is really powerful, and nor is the social only model of ADHD. Neither is sufficient. This is a social disease, brothers of the internet who can't help themselves. The people who think mobile phones cause it. I do think mobile phones are damaging, but they don't cause ADHD. I think it's like saying, if you dig big holes in the ground, it's the cause of blindness. No, it's just not helpful for blind people to do that. The two aren't causative. This is bad, particularly for people with ADHD. I was walking my dog in the forest the other day, James, and I just immediately felt shame about having ADHD. Just for no reason.
Walking my dog in the forest.
Yeah, in the forest, yeah. And I thought I should be able to exist without mood medication. Surely, how can I have to take stimulants every day just to exist? That can't be right. I must be better than that. And it's partly because I'm naturally medication hesitant. I like to live naturally as much as I can. But I think mainly it's because I've internalized this idea that ADHD isn't real, even though I know it is. I still feel that. Even though I don't think it, I still sometimes feel that I should be better than that, which is crazy. I know it is, but it helps me to learn about the history, to know that it's been around forever, that generations, thousands of years of people have had it, and it will be around forever. I'm in excellent company, present company accepted. And the knowledge of the history of ADHD allows me to say, this is disabling. And I don't go around criticizing disabling challenges, whether they're diagnostic, social, or otherwise. I don't say I shouldn't need crutches if I've hurt my knee. I live life with the crutches. I stay positive, but I acknowledge that I need that to help me through it. That's my tip. Is that a tip? It's not even a tip, is it? Just before we do the break, James, what's the future for you? Because you didn't say that in the first one. I want to know.
Yeah, because I obviously forgot. I agree. The 3 columns I think should be separated: inattentiveness, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. I believe that there will be some movement for sub-threshold ADHD, because there's evidence that if you've got 4 and not you've got 4 and not 5 symptoms, sorry, you can't have ADHD, or you're just inattentive and not combined type, even though they have worse outcomes. And like you, I genuinely hope that the diagnostic process and criteria and assessment start to take into account the emotional side of ADHD. You and I've talked about this, and we've talked in the past about it, because we don't know that the emotional side is biological and not kind of is socially driven from the years of having undiagnosed ADHD. But we do know that biologically, the part of the brain that's, if you like, the rational prefrontal cortex isn't as well connected to the emotional areas, the amygdala and the hippocampus. And therefore it could be entirely or largely driven biologically. And I think there's enough evidence that at some point in the future, it will be, kind of looked at and, this is a biological thing. And therefore it is part of the makeup of most, if not all, people with ADHD.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. Shame we haven't got time for the game. Season 3.
Well, I mean, I think we should do it, really, because I can't remember what happened at the end of the last series.
I won.
The whole thing. Did we do like a get this right and you've won the series? I can't remember. I know we were going to do that, and then we took the planned end to series 2.
We had
that wasn't in any way
ending,
unplanned or related to burnout, mental health, or other things. I have got a game though, Alex, and it means the scores are 0-0, so you're not losing technically.
Oh, that's exciting.
I wanted to do the game about when I was on the weight loss drug and I shat myself, but you know about that, so I can't.
No,
I can't use that. Remember when I ate the same thing twice and had the shits for 18 hours twice on it and hadn't worked it out? Fucking, I'm sure I told you this. That was that would have been a brilliant game. Why did I shit myself? Would have been an amazing game.
Because you had the same thing twice.
Yes, and didn't realise. Okay, I've got a game and it's based on gazebos and numbers, which I don't think anyone's ever said that sentence before. So are you ready, Al?
Yeah.
Okay, so something happened that I ended up struggling with our gazebo, which we've gone through 3 of them because we buy fucking hell, James, think. The ones you put away, what's the word, Alex? Not permanent ones, like temporary or whatever gazebos, because they're cheaper.
Shit cheap.
And shit cheap gazebos. So which of these 3 things do you think happened? 1, during whichever storm it was we had about a month ago, did I forget to take the canvas bit off the top because that's torn several times and the material tore? And this was something that I was instructed to do and didn't do. So did that happen? Option 2 is because the top bit of canvas doesn't actually fit very well. If it rains, it fills up with these little kind of buckets, if you like, or dips of water. which I have to push off. And did I push it off onto myself and got fucking soaked? Or option 3, because of the fact that it's a cheap gazebo and there are some tears in it, which for some reason Sam's filled with expanding foam. I'll never understand that. Did I not notice that one of the holes filled with expanding foam had reopened right above my smoking chair, and I ended up sitting on a small hillock of snow getting my arse wet? So didn't take it down and it got torn, pushed a massive big amount of water on myself stupidly, or sat on a hillock of snow because Sam's expanding foam-filled hole in the thing had failed.
Oh, that's amazing. It's not that I don't think you were soaked with water because you're a Dracula. You'd have just flown up as a bat. I don't think you took the canvas. I think it's the snow. I think you got snow on you.
I love it. I love it when the first thing you say
I don't think it's the actual.
I love because I can just relax and sit back. Yeah, no, I all over myself. I was trying to push it up, and stupidly, I literally walked out of the gazebo as I pushed it, and pushed about
things like
10
that
liters of water.
So common, aren't they? When you think, why the fuck did I do that? If I'd given it 1 second's thought, I wouldn't have done that.
Do you want to know something even worse?
Yeah,
it's the third time I've done it. I'll push the water onto myself.
Oh, that's
it's not
amazing.
like I've done that 3 times. Anyway, so it's a brilliant start to the series, not in terms of the content, which is obviously shit, but just in terms of me winning the game. That's 1-0. And on that delightful note, we'll take a break. You won't, but we will. It won't really be a break, but we'll be back in part 3 to answer some of your questions. See you then. Trumpet. Welcome back to part 3 of episode, says in the script, 172, ADHD and eyesight, which isn't correct.
No.
So that's, what's that, like the 16th mistake so far? Episode 179, not 180, which it also says in the script, where we're talking about the history of ADHD. And in part 3, as usual, we answer some questions, or try to, that you've sent in. Now, obviously, we haven't got Mrs AuDHD with us, and she normally asks the first question. I can't really do Stoke accent.
She doesn't ask it, does she? She just reads somebody else's question out, I think.
She does, yes. Yeah. Anyway, question 1 is from Emmy, and this isn't Emmy's real name, and it says, "Hi, I'm 14 and I love the podcast." It's our youngest listener during 14.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Hi, Emmy.
Putting up with that nonsense and references from the 1970s is impressive for a 14-year-old. Over the last few months, I've been trying to work out if I have ADHD, which has been pretty tricky, but your podcast has certainly helped, so thank you all. In follow-up to a TikTok I recently saw, I was wondering if ADHD traits can become more noticeable and extreme in girls once they hit about 12 or 13. I'm not sure how reliable this is, but apparently the estrogen levels in the body can affect ADHD symptoms, hence the increase at teenage years. I was hoping you could clarify, as it really helped me in my search for either a calm, neurotypical life with the faint memory of that one random time I thought I had ADHD, or an awkward conversation with my mum and a clinical diagnosis. The ramblings in the line underneath. I thought for a second, shit, it makes it sound like I'm thinking the question is, thank you for the pod and sorry for the rambling. Stay safe. So,
thank you. Shall I take this, James, as the expert?
Yes, take it.
I'm not really going to take it. Actually, thinking about it, can you take this?
I'm happy to take it. So, let's talk about estrogens. There's 3 main estrogens in the body. The most common, which everyone calls estrogen, but that's the name of the receptor, is estradiol. And that is the form of estrogen which is throughout the female lifespan until it drops off at menopause. It's the main estrogen in the body before menopause. After menopause, you've got estrone, I believe, and that comes from the body fat stores. And you've also got estriol, which is in the body during pregnancy. Now, all of these types of estrogen activate the estrogen receptor. So there's actually 2 receptors, but different hormones can activate them. And if you look at where those receptors are found, Alex, in the brain, then we know that they're found in the amygdala, which regulates negative emotions, in the hippocampus, which adds, which means
seahorse.
Yes, in the hippocampus, which adds context to those emotions. In the prefrontal cortex, Alex, in the striatum.
Prefrontal cortex.
The what?
That means
prefrontal
cortex.
Yes. If you look in most of the brain areas, we know that estrogen receptors are found, and they're also found in the parts of the brain that make up the reward system. So we know that estrogen not only leads to dopamine release, but acts as a dopamine agonist. And what that means is it can activate dopamine receptors in parts of the brain related with ADHD symptoms. So particularly, we always talk about the 3 M's, so menarche, which is when periods start. What's the second? Menstruation and menopause, and also kind of postnatal. These points of life where estrogen levels change are when we often see changes in symptoms. So absolutely, Emmy, not my real name, hitting puberty and starting to have estrogen levels change can change your symptoms or make your symptoms more apparent.
You should have let me answer this one. I'd have just said probably.
It would have been quicker, wouldn't it?
Probably, yeah. And James, on something I read yesterday about the science of emotional dysregulation, I had no idea where I got it. James sent it to me. He wrote it. It points out that adolescence is when emotional dysregulation typically starts as well, not just in girls, boys as well. And you can imagine that it wouldn't be the ADHD symptoms getting worse, but the emotional dysregulation, which I think is the hardest bit for me to deal with, is my ED. It's typically exactly those years when it kicks in horribly. It does for everyone, but with ADHD,
erectile dysfunction kicks in horribly.
I wish. I don't know what that means. No. It doesn't make any sense.
I'm sure Lisa does. Anyway, Alex, do we have another question?
From me or from one of the listeners?
From a listener.
Right,
you're just a vessel that delivers their question.
State the obvious. Right, I miss her a little bit. This is a question from Yasmin, and it says, "Hi, I'm currently watching your podcast on working memory on Spotify. Loving it so far. I was just curious to know if you've always been this forgetful or if it came along oblique, got more noticeable in your adult years. I'm on the extremely long waiting list for a possible diagnosis of ADD or ADHD, but the symptoms I have, I've only really started to notice over the past few years. One issue I'm having is I'm a professional dancer and I've been dancing for 23 years. Even though my choreography retention has improved, I still really struggle at times more than others with the same or less amount of experience, especially in auditions when I have to remember routines so quickly. Do you think this is hugely linked to ADHD? I hope you don't mind my questions. Tricky one, because we can't say for individually, can we? We haven't got a clue.
I think it's linked to dancing continuously for 23 years. I'd be fucking exhausted if I did that. Yeah, what do you think, Al? Have you got anything on this, or do you want me to very quickly pull something out of my arse alongside those pigs in blankets to try and answer the question?
6 of them. I think that I would remember that we learn differently. We don't learn less well. So the short-term and long-term memory aren't measurably effective on average in adults with ADHD. Working memory, the very short term, can be. And so if your memory is affected, whether you're ADHD or not, it's often more related to stress and anxiety or depression or just busyness, something like that. Their actual long-term memory, there isn't any evidence supporting that being worse in ADHD. Having said that, and I know that, James, you'll be able to throw some light on to learn, it's not as simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, it isn't. What's interesting about this is there are parallels with Sam and how she approaches the pole, doing normally kind of on all fours creepily. And therefore, when you're dealing with something, even when you're experienced, Jesus, there's a lot of things in there which we didn't do. When you have an activity like dance, sports, for example, where there are complicated moves, the audition thing is interesting. You mentioned stress. If you're doing an audition, I would imagine there's an element of, even if you're not nervous because you're experienced, but that you will have the fight or flight response. Alex and I have done God knows how many public talks and stuff, and still beforehand, even though I am not consciously nervous, the fight or flight response kicks in and my mouth goes dry and I can feel it. Now that can, as you said, impact how the brain works. If your body is in fight or flight because it's thinking, shit, there's a threat, then the way in which it functions is different. And that can definitely have an impact on how you remember the order of moves you've got in your choreography. There's also issues like kind of processing speed, which often when it comes to following instructions and learning moves, working memory, which whilst it is a very short-term form of memory, can impair I suppose performance in these things, and kind of lots of other stuff. And the bit earlier on, I think, in the question, which was about getting more noticeable in your adult years, I think that's interesting because lots of people that we talk to say it's getting worse. I got diagnosed and now things are worse. I'm forgetful more. And what we think, I think I'm right in saying, Al, is that part of that is unmasking, and part of that is now what ADHD is. You've got a name for it, and you spot it more.
I think that's what it is for the most part. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think, part of this maybe getting worse in the adult years is being more aware of it and noticing it more.
When they take children and adults, and the idea of you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and when people report their memory, they say their memories get worse. But when you actually go into a lab and check, they don't. It's just that people who are adults and getting on, they've just got a lot of shit going on. They have a lot to remember. So it might be you're trying to do a dance performance and you've got to sort out the mortgage and the admin, and you've got all these things to do, and the importance doesn't seem as much, and memory's based on emotional importance. So it might be how you remember and what you're remembering are changing, and it appears that you can't. That's something that we've noticed a lot.
Have you ever seen me dance, Al? Have you ever seen me dance?
I would pay money to see you dance. As you know, I do dancing as a hobby.
I was about to say, our hardy listeners are aware that you do dancing with your mates in Germany. You may or may not know, I used to sometimes take substances which might be associated with. Yeah, I heard. Yeah. Listen, quick sidebar. I, back in December, took a heroic dose of a psychedelic substance.
Yeah.
And messaged Alex saying something along the lines of, I've taken my psychedelics. I need to tell you, you are important, not just as a person, but as a thing. And then followed that up 15 minutes later with, side note, what's a normal amount of urine? And what was your response, Al?
I can't. What did I text? I can't remember.
You messaged back, so this is drugs, is it? And I thought that was the funniest thing you've ever said. And it was amazing. But yes, getting back to dancing, the only time I've ever really danced, because I'm very self-conscious, is under the substance, under the influences of substances that maybe make you less self-aware. And I can remember being in a big club, believe it or not, and apologies for those that are listening, you may vomit into your mouth when you hear this, dancing on like a podium with a female friend of mine. And this was a club back in the very early 2000s where you could send messages via a phone and they'd be displayed on a screen. This massive screen right next to us which said, "That bird's fit, but I don't like the gay guy that's dancing with her."
That's wonderful.
That, and I take that as it is a compliment. My dance moves are obviously shit hot, but I don't do them anymore. Anyway, let's move on to question 3, which I suppose I'll do. And this is from Michelle. And it says, "Hi all, I'd be interested in knowing your thoughts about whether medication is still useful after menopause."
You've done this on purpose. You've grouped this as an estrogen.
Yeah, well,
which I like. I think we should do that.
We're estrogen heavy on this episode. I've heard on other social media messages that medication is not so useful when there's no estrogen. Currently waiting for an assessment appointment for ADHD and dreaming of possible help from meds. Actually, pretty sure I'm AuDHD, but restricting my assessment to ADHD due to cost, and I don't think they can help much with the autism bit. That's not my thoughts. I was already in perimenopause, but for a few months now, I've been on an estrogen blocker for breast cancer treatment, so no hope of HRT for me. What's the score with meds when you have no estrogen?
I think massive clacks on that we can't talk about that individual. Can you imagine if we gave advice and it was wrong medically? Just absolutely all we can talk about is statistics and populations. It would be wildly illegally inappropriate for us to make any recommendation whatsoever. It's a decent klaxon.
Yeah.
Having said that, do you want to just talk about menopause in general and estrogen? Because it isn't true that you have no estrogen, is it?
Yeah. So as we said, the body fat produces estrogen from testosterone. All steroid hormones come from cholesterol, which is converted into pregnenolone, and then that pregnenolone. That's really boring, isn't it, Al? But I know as an endocrinologist,
Really
I fucking love it.
love all this.
And this is why
there's more than one enzyme involved.
and this is why bodybuilders who take testosterone supplements can get man boobs, because that excess testosterone gets converted to estrogen, and that drives gynecomastia, the development of breasts in men. Now that means there is some estrogen, but just dramatically lower, and
it really
that
is
depends.
super low, is it?
Yeah, and it depends on your levels of body fat, because the hormone, which is called aromatase, is found in body fat, and it produces bits of estrogen plus the estrone, the other one I can't remember. Yeah, estriol, which is produced as well. So there's tiny little bits. We also get exposed to estrogen-like molecules which are in food and in plastics. So there's lots of these. They're called SERMs, selective estrogen receptor modulators. So estrogen receptors, which are in the brain and throughout the body, will still be bombarded with things that look like estrogen, but you won't have as much estrogen. When it comes to kind of what might happen with meds, and again, this isn't advice, this is just what we know from the literature, that people have looked at giving women in the menopause who are menopausal ADHD medication, and in at least one study it was shown that it improved some of the symptoms that you see in both. So emotional regulation, kind of brain fog, etc. So it's certainly possible that it's something that in the future, would be more.
They're doing more trials right now, aren't they, on exactly that?
I don't know, are they?
Yeah, I was reading about them pre-trial things on exactly that and testing.
Didn't ask your mate Johannes and see if he knew about it.
I didn't know. I don't need to, because my sister-in-law also used to work for him. We just have a conversation at dinner last night.
with that level of nepotism, why am I still unknown in the world of ADHD outside of this fucking podcast?
Because they don't want to speak to me.
Amazing.
That's not true.
Amazing.
Oh, that's really
anyway.
Good. But if you are, especially with cancer, but with any illness, just talk to your doctor about it, because they'll have a look at contraindications and they'll have that conversation. It's not a conversation for two idiots on a podcast to advise on. It's for your doctor.
Exactly. And on that very serious but well thought out note, that was episode 179 of the ADHD Adults podcast, where we talked about the history of ADHD, amongst other things. I'm not for Alex, for fuck's sake. I'm not singing your history by Shakespeare's sister. And again, I'm just trying to remember who was it that wrote us the lesson when I was 14. They're not going to remember Ellie. They're not going to remember fucking Shakespeare's sister, or how high one of the singers' voices was and how low the other singer's voice was. I'm not singing it. But if you're still listening, thank you for listening. Thank you for being patient with us, having a planned break at the end of series 2. Obviously, if you're interested in more of what we do, there's a book coming out apparently in March. I do love the fact that we're doing the audio book recording before this episode comes out, and
we'll already have done it. Or
we've been sent through the bits that we're both going to be reading out. And I think they've done a good job of giving you the shit bits and giving me the bits that aren't shit. So the bits I wrote, actually. You can also get in touch on the website, www.theadhdadults.uk, where you can send in questions or abuse, whatever you want to. You can join our lovely Patreon community, where we do body doubling every morning, and where Mrs AuDHD basically does everything, because obviously I dropped out most things in the last 6 months as my mental health deteriorated. And other than that, let's just say thank you for listening, and bye-bye.
Yeah, cheers. Nice to be back for season 3. Bye all.
Trigger warning, klaxon. Klaxon, 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 big klaxon. Trigger warning, klaxon. Klaxon, 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 klaxon.
It says I have a story about MC Hammer.
Do I have a story about MC Hammer? Did I?
I don't know. I imagine so. Oh no,
That's
I have a
weird.
story about MC Hammer.
He liked my thing on Twitter.
MC Hammer did.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
No, the thing is that I did an MC Hammer dance for Sam. In the morning, put the song on and did the kind of hands on the hips and shuffling to the side thing, and she loved it. So I thought, well, you know what? I might use that as something to kind of surprise her with. So one morning when she was downstairs and the light was off, and I remember saying, Sam, can you come upstairs? And she was like, what? And she came upstairs and it was dark. And all of a sudden I put the lights on, started the song and started doing the MC Hammer dance, and she started crying.
Why?
She wasn't expecting it. It was all too much.
Autism.
And,
oh,
yeah,
wow. That's
yeah.
amazing. In my head,
And
when you do the MC Hammer dance, James, it looks more like the lobster guy from Futurama kicking his lord.
Yeah, Zoidberg. It's not dissimilar, Al. It's not dissimilar.